All right, what's going on? So, I debated whether or not to include what I'm about to show in the last video on Sirius A and Sirius B. Ultimately, I decided not to include it, but upon further reflection, I'm realizing that I should have put it in the video. And remember that this is not my own original research. This is from a video that I found on YouTube many years ago. Otherwise, I would give credit to the person who came up with all of it, but they have long since left the internet. Which is to say that I have not personally verified this information on my own because it's sort of outside my scope of expertise. I don't know a lot about astronomy, like I said. So disclaimers aside, remember that this is the radar chart of the orbits of Sirius A and Sirius B, starting with July 4, 1776, the symbolic beginning of America, and ending on August 31st, 2019. And these dates here at the points are the periapsis of the orbit. And the last one was in 1994, and then the apopsis is in late 2019. Each one of these plots is one 50-year cycle. So there were 5 50-year cycles of the orbits of Sirius A and Sirius B from 1776 to 2019. And we get this pentagon shape, or pentagram. What's interesting, though, is that inside of the pentagon is another pentagon. And this is September 11th, 2001, plotted on the graph. And so there's this arrow coming down here to show the general area where it was at. And this is where it gets a little crazy because when you actually overlay the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. on this spot, you can see that the arrow is pointing right at the area where the alleged plane hit the Pentagon on 9/11. And this is the picture right here of the damage to the Pentagon. And you can see if you use the square in the middle here to kind of get a idea of where the impact zone was, right in this area, you can see that it's kind of, if you put the square right here, it's like right in that area. If you flip this around, you can see that the arrow is going right through this side of the Pentagon. Now, actually, it doesn't really matter which side of a pentagon that you put here because each side gives you the same image, whichever way it's flipped, just due to the nature of the geometric shape. So you have this massive coincidence, as it were, that the orbits of Sirius A and Sirius B, when plotted on this chart from 1776 to 2019, just so happens to show the actual impact of the quote-unquote plane that hit the Pentagon on 9/11 itself. That's wild stuff. But it gets even more interesting. So this is going on 9/11 in Washington, D.C. Now let's see what was going on in New York. And again, I have not verified this on my own. I don't have Stellarium, so we'll just take all of this as valid for now, keeping in mind that all of this needs to be vetted and fact-checked. This is September 11th, 2001 at around 10:20. And this is Sirius, the position. Obviously, it was daytime, so you could not see Sirius. But when it is aligned to where it would be at this time, if you could see it, you can see that it's sort of in direct alignment with the World Trade Center complex and the Washington Square Arch. And according to this researcher, the towers collapsed at 9:59 a.m. and 10:28 a.m., so the Sirius transit was squarely between the collapses. the scene on 9/11/2001, looking on Fifth Avenue beyond the arch, it is a few moments before 10 a.m. If you could see the stars, and now you can, you would notice that Sirius is directly above the left edge of the South Tower. To put it another way, as Sirius reaches the left edge of the South Tower, it collapses. Then, half an hour later, as Sirius reaches the right edge of the North Tower, it too collapses. It is as though Sirius itself conducts and coordinates the collapses. And this is the Washington Arch, and you can see how the Twin Towers are directly under the arch from a certain perspective, and going by the perspective here where the Washington Arch is in that similar straight alignment where you can see the Twin Towers, Sirius is directly above in the same alignment as these two. All of this is to say that clearly Sirius played a large role in this mega ritual that was taking place in New York and Washington, D.C. And then here is another image where the spot that Sirius actually was as the events on that morning unfolded is clearly right in line with the arch and the Twin Towers, and then it's transiting over the towers as they are being destroyed, which is just wild. And then there is this memorial to Sirius, the actual rescue dog that supposedly died on 9/11, and I couldn't believe it when I saw this memorial. If you go read the fine print down here, it's actually sponsored by JP Morgan Chase, which is just a hilarious little tidbit. But first of all, Sirius being this bright blue star, they have the memorial to Sirius, the dog that died on 9/11, Sirius the dog star, and it's this bright blue color. And the first thing I notice is Sirius, the actual dog, was a Labrador retriever. And I don't know about you, but in all my experience viewing dogs, and especially labs, I've never seen, or I can't remember seeing, their ears ever being pointed up like this. And so immediately I say, wait a second, this is obviously resonating with Anubis here. The way that they constructed this memorial to Sirius, the dog that supposedly died on 9/11. And when you go to the relationship between Sirius and the Egyptian calendar, there's also this little tidbit about how the 70-day period during which Sirius disappeared from the night sky before its heliacal rising again was also the period of time between mummification and entombment, when through the ceremony of the opening of the mouth, the dead person was believed to reawaken to eternal life in the underworld. So in the memorial to Sirius, they have this literal resonance to Sirius the star itself, the dog star, and also resonance to Anubis, and this whole relationship between the afterlife, the duat, and the period of mummification and entombment, which is 70 days, which just so happened to be the same amount of time that Sirius was in the underworld, as it were. And then that's how they tied in the whole Isis, Osiris, Horus story, which is the eyes and Horus, the central brain, which represents this, new birth or enlightenment according to these traditions. And then, just taking this further, Sirius the dog was actually a yellow Labrador. So then there's the whole thing that I went over in the prior video about the yellow sun and this transitory period that's taking place where our perception of the sun, whatever the cause may be, has changed from a deep yellow to a bright white star. And to that point where it's actually mimicking the star Sirius and how Sirius looks. in the night sky. Our sun basically is Sirius now. And so it's interesting just toying with this idea how the yellow Labrador Sirius dies on 9/11, or the yellow sun dies, and then it's replaced by the blue star Sirius. And then just taking that even one step further, there's this whole relationship between Washington, D.C., the Pentagon, and the orbit of Sirius A and Sirius B, and those cycles over the entire history of America to date. And then you have another one of the memorials, which was the Tribute in Light, where they put 88 light bulbs as a memorial of 9/11, and it was on the roof of Battery Park. So you have Washington, D.C., right? D.C. is short for direct current in electrical terms. And then you have AC, alternating current. And of course, there's the band AC/DC. Surprised that they would have that sort of name for one of the most popular mainstream bands, just sort of, resonating with that idea of electrical circuits and this whole thing that's going on. So you have a memorial to 9/11 with 88 lights on Battery Park, and that obviously ties into the whole Back to the Future 9/11, the walk thing, which has been gone over in many other places, so I won't get into that now. But, it ties in the whole monolith 2001: A Space Odyssey thing too. But the fact that this memorial was put on the Battery Park garage with the 88, and then you have the orbit of Sirius A and Sirius B, and then you have the whole thing how it kind of looks like DNA, but it also looks like 8s. So maybe that's where the whole 8 thing is coming from, this orbit of Sirius A and Sirius B. And it's so interesting. Somebody brought up in the comment section of the last video, Magical Egypt, and this was an old series that had all sorts of people in it, but I remember at one point I saw a video from Lon Milo Duquette, who, coincidentally enough, is now the head of the OTO. And he was going over how all of this Egyptian imagery and hieroglyphs and just general lore is about navigating the duat, navigating the afterlife, so that you can reincarnate with your memories of your prior incarnation intact. And this might be the actual secret that all of these societies at the highest levels know, is how to reincarnate with their memories of prior incarnations intact. And you can see how the bloodlines would be able to stay in power in that way, because they would have so much more information than the general population. And it's interesting, right, how they're referred to as the blue bloods in certain circles. And you have Sirius, the blue star, the blue bloods, right? And so I don't know, going back to the last video, is this metaphor or is this more literal? Is it just a metaphor for some sort of higher level of consciousness that these individuals believe that they possess, to the point where they organize all of these rituals designed to manipulate our consciousness in alignment with Sirius? And given whatever they've injected into that, it has an impact on us? Or is there something more literal, going back to the AC/DC thing, the direct current thing, Washington, D.C., to the point where there's some sort of electromagnetic circuit relationship between Sirius and the sun and the earth? Remember, there is the 50-to-1 gold to silver ratio. You have gold and silver being in almost all electronics. Is that sort of a metaphor for this relationship that Sirius has to the earth and the sun, to the point where when Sirius is in certain alignments, it has a effect on our general electromagnetic field, and thus our electromagnetic fields individually, because we are all connected to the ionosphere and then the magnetosphere, and that's all connected to the larger system outside of the Earth? I don't know. It could go either way. or maybe it's somewhere in the middle. I'm just kind of throwing this all out there because obviously it's sorcery of the highest levels. That's the only way I can describe this. This is some high level sorcery. I mean, literally, you have this 200 plus year pattern of the orbit of Sirius A and Sirius B, and it just so happens that where 9/11 2001 falls on this distribution chart, it's in the exact spot where the quote unquote plane hit the Pentagon on 9/11. That is just incredible stuff. So, if true, this is clearly evidence of orchestration on a scale that most would not be able to fathom regarding the true nature of the events that are portrayed to us through the media. And 9/11 is just a case study in the machinations of this intelligence. They've been orchestrating things on this level for a long time. You know, you look at Washington, D.C., and the obelisk, Washington Monument, the Capitol building, and the reflecting pool. And first of all, the Washington Monument is sitting in a Vesica Pisces. And there's all sorts of myths and esoterica surrounding the Vesica Pisces, but going back to the idea of Sirius, Sirius A, Sirius B, and Sirius and the sun, you know, if there's something to these sorts of relationships, well, it could be a reference to that. But again, there's all sorts of other things that it could be too. But the point is that on the 4th of July, Independence Day, as it were, you have this alignment where Orion is sitting right here when the sun is in this position. And if you look at Orion in relation to Sirius, you know, depending on the angle that you're viewing the sky, I mean, Sirius is sort of right here compared to Orion, if this view holds compared to this one. And again, I don't know about astronomy enough to say that one way or the other. I wouldn't even know how to look that up and check. So maybe somebody can point out if this is true or not, depending on the 4th of July and where everything is. But it could be that based on this view that Sirius is sitting right down here in the reflecting pool when this takes place, sunrise on July 4th. Sort of in line with the Pleiades, and the 7 stars of the Pleiades are all over the Masonic tracing boards as well. And this would really get into deeper the idea of Sirius and its relationship to the sun, the moon, and the earth. If it's sitting in the reflecting pool on July 4th, given what we know about Sirius A and Sirius B and the relationship to 1776 July 4th and this radar chart of the 50-year patterns leading up to the end of this year and how September 11th was right in here, yeah. So there's some sort of maybe mirror aspect to Sirius that's being pointed to with this whole alignment and the way that they built this into Washington, D.C. Again, the direct current aspect, the whole battery thing with the tribute to light on the top of Battery Park, the 88 lights in the 2 blocks that mimic the Twin Towers that were destroyed, as Sirius itself was in alignment with the Washington Square view of the Twin Towers on 9/11. As they came down, Sirius transited above them, you know. So the whole thing is pretty wild. But that gets back into what I was talking about in the last video. You know, I don't know exactly what's going on here, other than it's obvious that Sirius has a very significant place in whatever system this intelligence is using to manipulate the collective mind, both overtly and subconsciously and subliminally. And you look at the way that, going back to number 3, and the idea of circuitry and batteries and harnessing a current, it's interesting how things like the Julian calendar were set to renew when Sirius reached its highest point in the sky, in the sense that we're given this New Year's Eve celebration every midnight on January 1st, which is in a way harnessing the collective current of humanity, where everyone is celebrating at this moment in time, but they're unaware of the larger celestial mechanics that are at work, to the point where if you take into account the ley line system and how these cities and megalithic structures are all built along the Earth grid to coincide with pockets of electromagnetic energy that are more potent than other spots on the Earth. Well, you can see how everyone celebrating in these cities would produce a certain energy that might be able to be harnessed in a different dimension as it is collected on all of the ley lines throughout the planet Earth during that period of time. And that just kind of underscores the larger system that might be at work here as far as harnessing energy goes. And yeah, 9/11 is a perfect example of them doing that on a grand scale, but you have to understand that this sort of thing is taking place in every geopolitical event, or all of the news stories have, at least the ones that are pushed the most, they all have some aspect of this that is just beneath the surface, that isn't overt. And you can see how that trend might be manipulating people in ways that they just don't understand. I mean, myself included. But 9/11 specifically, when you place it in the chronology of events that have taken place, and then especially as you relate that to 2 years before 9/11 with Columbine and its own Pentagon resonance and the Columbine flower and 9/11 that I went over in the last video too, those two events intertwined with each other sort of underscore the deterioration of America, or the beginning of it, right? I mean, Columbine was the first mass shooting, and we've had how many countless mass shootings allegedly since Columbine, which has sort of had a major impact on the way people view their general safety. I mean, assuming they believe that all of the news is real, this has had a big impact on the way they view their general safety in the world around them as they go about their everyday activities. And then 9/11 played on that terrorist angle in a different way, where shortly thereafter there were a bunch of wars started. If you believe the official narrative of 9/11, you're potentially going around worried about terrorists, and then shortly thereafter you have the financial crisis, and then you have all of this civil unrest that kind of started with Occupy Wall Street, and then that sort of bleeds into, the Boston bombing and Sandy Hook, and then that bleeds into the Trump presidency, where he is billed as the conspiracy theory president, and he's sort of making light of information like I'm going over right now, where it's given this caricature of Alex Jones and Donald Trump. Oh, this is what people discussing these sorts of things act like. And on top of all that, you just have the way that Trump is the greatest troll of all time, and he is emotionally manipulating everyone to have just this general disposition that is agitated towards everyone around them, and it just gives people this dim outlook of everything that's going on. And the whole thing just started with this alignment between Sirius and the Twin Towers on 9/11, and then you can tie that back into the potential transformation of the sun. Again, it's obvious that our perception of the sun has changed. Now we can get into debates about why that's the case, but one of the possibilities is that there is this sort of electromagnetic, maybe plasma filament, whatever space might be, however that relationship might actually be taking place in what we call space, there might be some relationship between Sirius and our own sun where it has actually played a role in our own sun looking like Sirius itself now. And in that scenario, a lot of the ancient traditions have talked about the new ages that are potentially coming into being, and the sun changing might be a marker of that. And so if we weren't subject to all of this negativity, the general disposition and vibe on the planet could be much different right now than it otherwise is. And taking that one step further with the influence of the internet that has steadily progressed over the same period of time, recall from the last video the idea about how there are possibly adepts who are initiates into this higher information that might be actually focusing their intent onto film cameras or music to inject it with a certain energy that is designed to produce a certain reaction in the people that consume it or who allow it into their sensory perception system. Well, if that's going on in movies and music, do you think that it might be going on in what are referred to as the truth channels on YouTube? Do you think that they might be manipulating your consciousness on a level that you can't even perceive? Yeah. Pay attention to how you feel. I mean, if you're going to actually subject yourself to some of these less than credible channels, pay attention to how you feel during and after you're done consuming that information. Because I pretty much have no doubt that that's going on the internet as well. So, on that note, I'll leave it there. That's all I got for now. I'll talk to you guys later.